nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. And we all know this is going to be a great show. Every show's a great show, but we all know these people. Aditya, thanks very much for coming back on. We remember you from the Revisiting Karl Marx episode where we talked about India, Superpower 2020. That's a amazing country, India. Brett Nally from the USTP, the endorsed candidate. Zion 2020, Ben Zion 2020. If you don't know who he is, you're going to know in a second. And also, Brett Nally from the Brett Nally Show. He's a super longevity fan, health fanatic, a cryptocurrency guy. Just an amazing interview with Roger Ver. It was a great interview there, and we like it a lot. We're going to be talking about in this episode, we were going to have Dr. Manu on, and we were going to talk about Bolivia and the machinations that are going on there politically. But we're going to talk more generally about South America. But the reason we were going to talk about Bolivia is because in there's a Santa Cruz. It's a smart city that they're investing in off the basis of this idea that there's going to be a lithium boom in Bolivia. Lithium, of course, being core to a lot of the advanced technologies and the technological advance, a core component of a lot of the advanced technologies. Lithium batteries, for example, in smart cars, in battery-powered cars. So the notion is there's going to be a lithium, the price of lithium is going to rise. Bolivia has a mountain of a lot of lithium underneath the ground. They're going to sell it, and they're going to become momentarily rich in history, and then we're going to build a city off the back of it called Santa Cruz. And you can check out that interview. I did that interview with Dr. Manu. It's very interesting stuff. But he's not here. He was going to be here, but he's not here now. So we're going to talk instead just a little more generally about the South American experience. And also we're going to talk about micronations because, there's a lot in micronations, a lot of innovation that can be had in micronations. So to lead, Ben Zion 2020, we'll jump in with you. Bolivia. You've been close to Dr. Manu and this Bolivian Santa Cruz project. What do you think about the idea? What do you think about this notion that there's going to be a lithium boom and we're going to see an innovation such as a micro city in Bolivia? What did you think about the whole experience? Welcome to the show, Ben Zion 2020.
Yes, thanks, gentlemen, for doing this show, and I'm excited about these prospects for Bolivia. It's already well underway that there is this Bolivian lithium boom, and at the same time, Bolivia is not the wealthiest nation in the region. It's not one of the wealthier nations in the world, and so there's an awful lot of things to consider in building a city of this kind, in using these resources to benefit the people there. I would like to say a few words about Bolivia. They do have a solid tech industry generally. They have a good group of tech incubators and financial institutions and other institutions that support emerging technology generally. And I do think that they are well poised to benefit from this. And I think that this Santa Cruz is, we've all seen some of the videos and materials on this. This is looks to be an incredible project. And I, for one, am looking forward to learning more and being more involved with this set of undertakings. I think that there's a lot to talk about in this part of the world, and particularly Bolivia, besides, as you mentioned, and I'm looking forward to those discussions as well. But I don't think that this is a bridge too far in thinking of using this lithium industry to benefit the region and to benefit Bolivia in this way.
Aditya, lovely to have you back on the show. As I mentioned, revisiting Karl Marx, where we talked about capitalism in India and some innovations in India and some ideas to assist India. But we're moving over to South America now. I think Bolivia is classed as the global South. But you might have some ideas on Bolivia. Firstly, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And yeah, open up on Bolivia and or South America in general and or micronations, however you want to approach that topic. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I mean, I have many questions more than anything. Some of them, I hope we can work on together in the show. I think one of the first ones is what exactly makes a city smart, right? So I'm like I said, you brought the context of India, which was quite interesting. And before the show, we were talking about Palo Alto, and every city all over the world wants to brand itself as smart. Not every, but there's many, both planned and unplanned.
Aditya, are you there? I think we've lost Aditya.
We
You guys
may
can
have
still...
lost audio from Aditya.
That's unfortunate.
Yes, his point about this a little bit of a fuzzy definition, a little bit of a weasel word, this smart city idea, and certainly looking at some of these plans generally, and even in this case, there are questions of this kind. Is this the best kind of approach? Is this really the kind of smart city that we would imagine if in the sort of idealized context from the point of view of people in futurism studies and these related disciplines? We want to, that's part of the reason that I think we should be having this conversation is so that we can try to see that is the case, that we are able to make the best kind of smart city that we could possibly make.
I agree. Oh, he's back. He's come back. Obviously, your computer crashed there, Aditya. It's good to see you back here. Ben Zion was just commentating on this word, smart city. Continue where you left off.
I think I'm glad for the break in terms of making my point because I had a chance to think about it. The foundation for a smart city is standards for the infrastructure, because these days, the whole point of it being smart, it means that it's connected to the Internet of Things, right? And that means that all the different systems in the city can work together to achieve, smartness. Like kind of like if you have a house that's smart, you walk into a room, it knows you're there, so the lights come on. You leave the room and the climate control go off, right? So the whole point of a smart city is not only is everybody's power, water, and the streets and the public infrastructure, not only is it individually smart, it just all works together in a web. And another aspect of a smart city is that the citizens and other organizations have access to this data through APIs, and they can do stuff with it so that the city can keep getting smarter, right? And that people one of the most interesting places that I find smart city data coming out of is there's that running and jogging and cycling app called Strava, where people track their runs. And I just saw a really interesting thing about them where they kind of seem to have figured out, they haven't figured it out, but their data is better than any I've ever seen before on why there's such a huge gender disparity in cyclists in New York City versus in Europe. Even though as many people as a proportion tend to cycle to work. And I guess their conclusion based on a ton of different data that they have through the app is they were able to figure out that, there's the roads in New York, the bike lanes, they just really don't feel as safe. And women in particular get turned off by the lack of safety, like cars keep coming into the lanes and stuff. And they've identified the choke points that specifically keep people from commuting to work, women, whereas the same women will actually, bike for recreation, but they will not actually commute to work on their bikes because, when you have your morning commute, you have a different set of considerations. So, for a random city in the middle of nowhere, or any city in particular, like what kind of infrastructure do they need that this sort of data is being, seen by the correct people and then being worked on and then being implemented in the smart loop? So I don't know how that is supposed to work, and every city on Earth is probably making different standards, or every set of cities. So yeah, I just don't understand what Palo Alto plans to do about this. What Santa Cruz in Bolivia plans to do about this. If you get a grant from the World Bank, like what do you expect it to do? So I thought maybe we could talk about what does make a city smart.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Brett and Nally, you've been sitting there very patiently. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We had a great conversation. You can go check that out if you're watching the channel. Now, South America, smart cities, it's all happening. What do you think? What's your analysis on, smart cities, South American politics, and this idea of a Bolivian hypothetical idea of Santa Cruz based on a Bolivian lithium boom? And also, what's this notion of what makes a city smart? It's a very interesting question raised by Aditya right there. Firstly, welcome to the show also. It's good to see you.
All great points, Steele. Thanks so much for having me back. Great to see you, meet Aditya, and also see Ben Zion as well. And I want to share a little bit about my kind of background on this smart city topic, and also tie it into South American culture and their political beliefs and history. So first of all, I haven't really been following this story at all. I wasn't familiar with it until Ben reached out to me a few days ago. But my interest in politics and social engineering and geopolitics has been strong for about 15 years or so, probably even longer than that. But the Venus Project is something that we talked about during our interview, Steele, and I went to the actual Venus Project where Jacques Fresco lived and interviewed him, and was very intrigued with that, and I still am, with the resource-based economy. And I'm not necessarily supporting that. I just think there's a lot of interesting ideas there. And there's also a book behind me that I highly recommend that I first learned about from the Zeitgeist Addendum movie. That was the second Zeitgeist movie that Peter Joseph did, where he introduced Jacques Fresco. But also in that documentary is a gentleman named John Perkins. And he wrote a book many years ago, my guess is probably 15 years ago or so, called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And in that book, he outlines in very great detail how through many years he worked with these big governmental institutions, global government institutions like the World Bank, the United Nations. And they seem great at first because what they're doing and what they say they're doing is they're trying to eradicate poverty. And they're doing that by loaning money to smaller second and third world countries like Bolivia in this case. And if you listen to John Perkins and read his book and listen to a lot of other credible people, it just doesn't seem to be what actually happens. What actually happens is these countries go into massive amount of debts with maybe high aspirations. And it's complex, but typically what happens is it seems that these people running these governments might be either a little bit naive or a little bit corrupt, or maybe a little bit of both. And I just am always cautious when you have something like the United Nations looking to loan hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars to a country like Bolivia, because you have to ask, well, who runs the United Nations? Who's the president there? What's their incentives? How are they elected? And we can talk about that as well. And then separately from that, when it comes to like smart cities, Jonathan Richenthal is a gentleman that I highly respect, who's been a smart city innovator. I took a LinkedIn learning course of his a couple years ago when I was working at LinkedIn and connected with him. He was the CIO of the city of Palo Alto in California for about 7 years, until about last year. And he has some really interesting takes on what a smart city is. We can talk about that, but I'm just kind of going over some high level right now. But to me, a smart city is a city that uses the most advanced technology in the most economical way to improve the lives of the citizens. And we can go into more detail about that, but that's what I kind of view a smart city as actually being, and what it should actually accomplish for its citizens, and also, people who come to visit the city.
Ben,
a little bit of demographics. Just add on that a little bit of demographics of the country of Bolivia. It's 11.5 million people. About 1 million of those, by the standards of today, do not have electricity, and their median income with a pricing parity adjustment is about $8,000 a year per capita GDP. That's not the lowest, even by far, in the New World, nor is it a particularly high standard of living. So these are considerations when thinking about precisely what the questions that Brent was alluding to.
Yeah, and this idea of this World Bank sort of IMF debt trap. I mean, it's an interesting one. I think it's slowly sort of fading out. I mean, China is trying to use the same debt trap tactics around the globe, like embedded and enmeshed in this Belt and Road Initiative. They've done it to a few different countries now. Sri Lanka, obviously being a standout example, but there's others as well. But anyway, I think what Dr. Manu was talking about was they want to encourage private foreign direct investment, whether that be from governments or I think mainly from investment firms, in order to stimulate this city. And the reason he's not here is because they're actually opening up an innovation center where they're trying to showcase what can be accomplished. Now, Brett and Aditya have kind of defined what they think a smart city is. I just wanted to run by you, Ben, if you're happy with this definitional arrangement of a smart city. If not, what's your definitional arrangement of a smart city?
Well, I would like to tend to focus on a smart city as something that has municipal operations that are AI and automation driven to a higher degree, that has features like something akin to blockchain voting or e-voting and other high-level e-services. This is not something that exists in smart cities, so I would by and large, so I would regard these as not fully realized smart cities. But there's a few. We could make a rather lengthy wish list of futurist institutions and developments that are not yet realized to a higher enough degree. So perhaps that's a flawed way of looking at this. But I do think that things of this kind, particularly, are eminently achievable by the standards, the tech protocols of today. So it's not unreasonable to aspire to that.
Now there is a famous smart city, Sabah Al Hamad Sea City. It used to be known as Sea City. It's built out of Kuwait, and basically it's a city that's been built from nothing. I just watched a documentary on it in preparation for this interview here, this discussion on smart cities. It's not exactly a smart city, but its innovations are pretty intense. They had to create a whole new inland lake and build out a whole series of beachfronts. It's a pretty cool city, but I don't think it's a smart city, and it's disappointing for a brand new planned city that's on a flat surface to not be smart. But I do like this definitional range that you gentlemen have come to, especially like Brett Nally's arrangement, where it's kind of this idea of a living entity based on data. I think this is important. Aditya, you mentioned data too. How important, Aditya? How important is data in a smart city? Obviously, when you have a smart city and you have something that's living and evolving, I also like to think of a smart city as something that would anticipate future technologies. So I would like to see in this Santa Cruz city, for example, I would like to see room for anticipated technologies that don't exist yet, but are coming down the pipeline, and most definitely, and that can be integrated fully. For example, in Australia, in our planned cities, whether that be, it's kind of like Washington, D.C. in America, we have larger roads than in our cities like Sydney that grew out of a sort of organic way because they anticipated larger cars. For example, that's a very poor example, but that's kind of what they've done. They anticipate. There's a whole a whole tram network that existed 100 years ago in the anticipation of the tram that they've just got installed now, but they anticipated the tram would one day get installed. I mean, this idea of future technological innovation. Aditya, how important is data in these smart cities? Because with Moore's law, right? You got the silicon chip. You got more transistors on the silicon chip, and what happened was sort of like we got up to this point with technology where it was so fast, but now we're actually creating the innovations on top. So you talked about the Fitbit. You talked about these wearables, these wearable technologies. What's the and the Internet of Things? What's the importance of data, Aditya, in these smart cities? How important and integrated do you see data being in these smart cities?
I mean, that's the whole point of the city being smart, right? That every service emanates data, and that the municipal government and regular people and third-party apps and things like that can all use this data and link it together and come up with suggestions to improve the city. So yeah, the data is valuable. That's the essential component. That's what makes the city smart, that it gives off data in a structured form, basically, right? So from every service that can do that, and that developers and the municipality have access to all this data in a way that they can link it. I just wanted to make the point that when I first heard about this lithium city from Ben a week ago, my first question was if you're going to build a new city somewhere, who are the anchor tenants of the city going to be, right? There have to be some rich people moving into this city. Otherwise, where's the economic advantage to making it smart? This ties into something that you had said, Brent, that we had actually covered in our Karl Marx episode. With that IMF debt trap, most of the countries being
lent. It's like we all froze up.
Most of the countries that are being lent money to, they just don't have economies that can actually generate more wealth. So the whole point was that they were being lent this money so that they could, just spread it around, and then, the economy would develop by itself. But that's something that just doesn't actually occur in any economy that isn't already highly developed, unless it's done through a massive central organization of the state, such as in China and, Singapore and a few other places. So the whole organic idea that you just spread money around the economy and, it'll just build up on its own doesn't actually work like that. It just fuels inequality. So if you're going to build a new smart city, the question was that I had for Dr. Manu is are the lithium mining companies going to move into this city, or what is the impetus behind creating this project? And okay, your economy might start out being led by these mining companies, but then are you planning to diversify it through some sort of planned economic structure? So I think this really makes this important question: is if you have a smart city and a smart government, how is that government supposed to be spreading the money around, both in terms of subsidies and also in terms of economic development?
I had the same question as well, because even on a large time scale, it's kind of where is the innovation going to flow after? Where is the money going to? What is it going to be? The innovator hub? What's the idea of this sort of investment? Yeah, I had the same question. Brett, Nally, what do you see as the role of data in a smart city?
Well, data is king, as you pronounce it. I pronounce it more data. There's the difference between us Aussies and Americans. But data is everything. I mean, if you don't have the right data, then you are making poor decisions. And data is becoming even more and more important as the technological revolution continues to take place and evolve even faster. So I think there's two aspects that we haven't touched upon yet. There's planned economy, and then there's also free market economy. So I don't know for sure which one this Bolivian smart city really lies more in, but it seems like it's more of the planned economy from what I could read up about it. And that's more of like the Venus project. So to me, that's more wishful thinking. It could work in certain scenarios. Certain planned economies have, you could say, worked for China in certain ways, but in other ways they failed miserably. I think we've probably all heard of ghost cities in China right now. Is everybody familiar with that? You see the documentaries of like literally cities that are completely empty that could house millions of people, malls that are bigger than the largest, mall in America, the Great Mall in Minnesota. So I would just want the Bolivian people to be very cautious of things that we already know like that, and be very cautious of, institutions like the World Bank saying that we're going to come and help you guys. Because I don't think that these institutions are as altruistic as a lot of people think. And I want the Bolivian people and other third world nations, that I've been to as well, like Cambodia has a very similar GDP and GDP per capita as I think the statistics that Ben reeled off. I think it's about 8,000 USD per citizen. So I've been in these types of countries and seen this types of poverty. I want these people's lives to improve, but I just want it to be done in the way that is the most historically proven methods of doing that. And to me, that's free market capitalism. It's not an easy answer, as Aditya was kind of talking about before. You can't just come in and do a quick fix or the Band-Aid fix and try and, build some infrastructure and think that everything's going to be okay and just hand out money. I think that you need to give people an opportunity to gain relevant skills to be able to live in that city and use it properly. And I haven't really researched or heard anything about that as far as this storyline goes. So you guys can maybe build upon some of those concepts or share your thoughts.
Yeah, a really good point. Planned economy versus sort of more free market economy. I mean, if you're only talking about delivering goods and services, and we already know the basic structures of how cities work, I mean, is a planned city really that terrible in amongst a free market country? This idea where you still have an exchange of goods and services, and it builds off the back of a free rate of free flow of capital. Not sure. Ben Zion 2020. The role of data in a smart city. What do you think?
Yes. I'm going to go back to my favorite talking point in speaking right now, in speaking about this, which is that you and I kind of talked about this quite recently, Steele. If it were up to me to be spending a lot of money on some initiative of this kind, I would tend to focus on what I spoke about quite recently at the longevity conference some weeks back. Creating legal mechanisms for for specific planning aspects here. For example, a public health service that treats aging as a disease is one utopian outcome. When it's the point that Aditya made about this not being a perfect use of resources in developing countries, it's basically true of every country. Nobody quite has the money to create a new community out of whole cloth that does everything that everyone wants. And so we really have to be a little bit selective in how we're approaching this sort of thing, which is why if I was had access to some millions of dollars, rather than going about some planned community or micronation initiative, I would use that money to create a lobby to achieve maybe more earthbound goals. So the question of how data should be used in a smart city, I think it should be a question of how we should use data in specific disciplines in urban planning more generally first, and then maybe in a few years, when we have some more takeoff effects, have a discussion of this of the how to build that smart city. But there are an awful lot of ways that we are already seeing, and it's a kind of thing also, like if people really did become interested in migrating to a new place, if that became something that really sparked the popular imagination, then maybe that's a different matter. But that same sort of thing doesn't seem to always be happening for human beings. So I think it's a good idea to focus on more specific initiatives and not have those kind of tendency to have a lot of ghost towns of smart cities like those in China and elsewhere. That's a big waste of money and time when people build this thing and no one comes, or it's not able to really provide something that's so distinct from what other urban environs are doing.
I think one thing that's really changed is traditionally your traditional city. And I grew up in Bombay, which is a city designed by the British Empire to accommodate maybe like 400 or 500,000 people, and then now the same infrastructure supports like 22 or 23 million people, right? So it's kind of like San Francisco in 2050 if we don't do anything about extending the BART or the sewage system, right? It's just like that, where in 1970 they had a great idea of the future and they built it, and then we just kept relying on it and kept relying on it and kept relying on it, right? So I've thought about like what it takes to make a city. And in the old days, I mean, first of all cities have to be planned in order for them to be successful, because the big thing about cities that are unplanned is that they run into really big bottlenecks that then turn into generational bottlenecks, right? Like, so in any city that's directionless, you can see these bottlenecks being formed, and you can already tell like 40 years from now, it's already a disaster. This is going to be like an epic disaster, right? If you've ever been to a city with too much traffic that just doesn't have enough road capacity, like Bangalore in India is one of those, right? Where like no matter what, like until we have cars that fly, there's just no way to make this city any more livable, right? Or another example is like in San Francisco, right by the Mission Bay. In the Mission Bay, they built this huge emergency center that has all the emergency services, fire, police. It's the main hub for the east coast of San Francisco, going south and north. It's where all the emergency vehicles come out of. And now right next to it, they've built the Warriors' new stadium. So, the minute you have a sports game, emergency vehicles will no longer be able to come and go. It's just the kind of thing that, when cities are not planned, that's exactly what happens. And making mistakes like that costs so much money, they cannot be undone for like 2 generations, right? But the big thing that changed about cities is that, one, the plan of making a city be around a central downtown, just the way real estate has changed and the way people have migrated to cities has changed, and what people use cities for has changed. It no longer makes as much sense, because it means that most of the creative people and most of the people who are actually part of the innovation economy of the city, instead of living next to each other in the central part of the city, they end up living in a ring around the city. So being in the city is not actually giving them the advantage of being in the same city. This is actually London's problem, where almost every person in the creative class lives in zone 2 or zone 3. And to meet other members of the creative class, they literally have to go all the way across the city. This is the case like in many parts of Paris too, for example, right? So the modern way to build a city is to actually build it in the mold of Silicon Valley or Los Angeles, where you actually have a bunch of small downtowns that are just between 5 and 15 kilometers apart. Right? So to get from one small downtown to another small downtown, you have to take some sort of rapid transit, which could be a car or a short train or whatever. But once you're in that mini township, you can walk around the whole place. So take like a couple Ubers or, just Lime bikes or whatever you need to, So, and that actually is a model that, as much map as you have, you can have as much city, and it's all pretty much the same in density. So I think one tip I would give to these people in Bolivia is that they don't need to build a very big downtown. They can just, build some things now and then plan for the future to be distributed like that. Because with digital technology and a good public transit network, that's all you really need.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the structure of cities. I mean, most cities around the world coalesce either around a major river system and or a port, and they grow up sort of naturally from there. You can think about it, almost any city in the world, and that a big city at least, and that is true. In Bolivia's case, Bolivia doesn't have a port, so I'm assuming that this smart city is going to be a sort of a port mechanism for Bolivia. It's because it's going to be in the middle of these two largest cities, and so it's kind of like this new governance port mechanism for a landlocked country. It's kind of interesting. What do you think, Brett and Nally, about this idea? What do you think about the idea of how it should be structured? Do you think it should all be structured around a super center? I know you've seen the Zeitgeist project, and that's a circular city with ringed transport loops, innovative integration with robotics, innovation centers dotted around the place, integrated with the ecology. Or do you think something like Aditya's talking about a series of smaller networks and smaller hubs? Or what do you think on the structure of a smart city, especially for a landlocked country where you're not going to coalesce around a port? You're going to just sort of build it in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, well, a lot of points there, Steele. And I'll just start by saying I think that Aditya made some really good points. He lives in Oakland. We were chatting before we went live here, the four of us. And I had lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for about the last 11 years until my family, my wife and I, moved here to Folsom, which is about 3 hours northeast, just about a half hour east of Sacramento. And what I've found interesting about Folsom is that it's generally, the city has grown more recently than the Bay Area in general. So the roads are paved much nicer. The infrastructure has been planned out much more recently and more intelligently. Things just work better. I don't have traffic up here. Whereas in the Bay Area, in the last 11 years I've lived there, I've seen the traffic get worse and worse and worse. One thing the Bay Area clearly does have working for it, as well as the greater Southern California area of, we'll call it greater LA, is what Aditya mentioned. All the smaller cities, Mountain View, Palo Alto, Sunnyvale, Cupertino, they were all these small cities that have their own downtowns. Now they're much larger and it's incredibly expensive to live there. But because it wasn't planned properly, it's not necessarily Mumbai, 400 to 500,000 capacity now at 20 million. It's heading in that direction, because even though there are more people moving out of the Bay Area than there have been in the past few years, there's still more moving in to the San Francisco Bay Area than there are moving out. So it is still growing and real estate's still going up. So you have all that to factor in, but my message on my channel on YouTube and what I generally like to focus back on is free market capitalism, audit your own thoughts, think about what's best for you, think about what you value, where do you want to live. I'm speaking as a privileged American in 2019, almost 2020. I have the freedom to be able to go and pretty much move anywhere I want in this country and almost anywhere in the world. So everybody doesn't have those freedoms and that type of privilege that I have. So if I'm the Bolivian people, if I'm putting myself in their shoes, what I would want is I would want to try and plan the economy as intelligently as possible for where you think the actual growth is coming, from a population standpoint and economic standpoint, and really try and build it right. And the way to do that is looking at data. It all comes back to data that we've talked about before and getting the data right. But I think we all know that same with statistics. There's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics, so you got to make sure you're looking at the proper data and then interpreting that properly. And that's not easy to do. So I'll leave it at that and see what you guys think about those comments.
Ben Zion, what do you think? Oh, sorry, did you go?
I just wanted to say that strata analysis that I saw, that was one of the best analysis I saw on what's wrong with the bike lanes in New York City. That analysis only came about because Strata is like a Silicon Valley company with like the best minds in the world not only just working on like their job, they're trying to show off like what's the most they can achieve with their data, right? So I wonder like what would a smaller city do with this data? I'm sure they'll do plenty that's useful, but I think a lot of the really big breakthroughs will be made worldwide for cities by people in existing innovation centers.
Ben Zion, what do you think about the sort of aesthetic, the structure of the city? Do you agree with Aditya that it should be a series of smaller hubs or something like the Zeitgeist Project, a larger super city with a circular super city? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of viable design prospects there. We should say that the Santa Cruz city it's already pretty well built, so it's not necessarily up to us to see how it's laid out. Certainly. Suburban sprawl of the kind that has been alluded to in this conversation is pretty well epidemic in the United States. There's a lot of big cities that really are not laid out in any practical way. Even you guys mentioned Los Angeles, which is by a decade and a half or something the first city in the world to be using automobiles, and to where everyone was using automobiles, and that lack of there wasn't at that time in the 1930s there wasn't urban planning wasn't the sort of well understood discipline that it is today, so people didn't really necessarily think in terms of that we're going to have this suburban sprawl problem in coming decades. So we always have to be thinking of how to make these places reasonable spaces in these ways. I want to shift gears for a second because I think this would be of interest to the panelists. In 2014, Bolivia banned cryptocurrencies, and but this project and projects in Bolivia more generally, they do want to be making use of blockchain technologies for applications of use to this municipality and of use to the people more generally. And I don't think it's outside of the discussion to even be talking about having a state-run cryptocurrency at some point in the future for almost any country. I wondered what your impressions are of this kind of ban of cryptocurrency speculation and usage in a developing country, and how you assess that relative to the use of blockchain technologies in other applications that would be of use.
I'll let Brett Nally lead on that one. Firstly, I'll say if you ban cryptocurrencies as a government, firstly, good luck. But yeah, Brett Nally, what do you say about cryptocurrencies in Bolivia?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, basically, the way that I view code now is code is just speech. And so cryptocurrencies are just code. It's just computer code, essentially. So you're banning free speech. I mean, that's just not good. I think we can all agree. So any government that bans a cryptocurrency is not your friend, in my opinion. And I won't move away from that in any scenario. It's just a way for people to transfer goods and invest in their future and their family's future. And if they want to speculate on it, they should be free to do that as well. So that's my stance on the idea of banning cryptocurrencies. And then as far as state-run cryptocurrencies, governments are free to do things like that. You already have many central banks and governments who are going that route. But as an investor, I would never want to invest in those cryptocurrencies. And what cryptocurrencies are trying to do is actually the exact opposite. They're trying to take financial power out of the government's hands, and particularly nation states, and give it back to the power of the people, which is how it was for thousands of years with gold and silver primarily being money. So that's what I'll generally say on that. That's my stance and how I think about it. Didn't even get into blockchain voting or anything like that, but I think a lot of people get the very high level of cryptocurrency wrong. They don't understand why Bitcoin was created. Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, was very, very clear about why he was creating it and what he thought was important if you read his writings. And clearly it was not so that we can have a Fed coin cryptocurrency. That's not why he was doing this. So that's my thought.
Yeah, Satoshi was definitely a free market capitalist, anarcho-capitalist type character, and yeah, you got to read the white paper to find out more about that. But yeah, all right, I think we've lost Aditya. He'll probably come back when he's ready. He's disappeared on us, so we won't get his thoughts on cryptocurrency. But I wanted to talk to you about other functions of a smart city or this city in Bolivia. Nally, Brett, Nally, you can open up on this one. Policing. How would you go about policing a smart city? Would you? I mean, obviously, you're big on data. You were mentioning a lot about data, but have you got any other ideas of how you would police a smart city?
Yeah, that's a really tough question and an emotional one whenever you start bringing in the police, because the future to me is pretty clear. We're gonna have to continue to evolve our societies with robots. Not just artificial intelligence, machine learning, things that are on our smartphones, but actual physical robots. And I think that this is a serious future that people should be considering a little bit more. I don't know what Bolivia's smart city plans are in regards to policing, so I can't really comment on that. But I think that in general, when it comes to policing, we want them to, of course, enforce property rights, protect the citizens who are paying the taxes, who are funding the police, not let the police get too much power, get out of control. I think body cameras are a super good idea. I remember when that was first starting to come into the United States. I think San Jose, California, was one of the first police jurisdictions that actually added on body cameras. And I remember reading some articles a few years ago about that, and a lot of people were freaking out. But what is the bad? I don't understand the bad side of this. I tried to read all of the negative side of this where people were freaking out, and none of those arguments or ideas sold me whatsoever. I mean, you're a police officer. It's your job. You're getting paid a salary. Nobody's forcing you to do this. You're free to quit if you don't like it. And it seems to be a really good idea to have cameras on them to make sure that it's all recorded and stored in the cloud so that even the police officer can't tamper with it. Because I've had a couple run-ins with the police where I know for a fact if it was being recorded, things would have gone differently for me in a more positive way. So that's what I'll say about that for now.
Ben Zion 2020, policing in a smart city. What do you say?
Yes. Well, I'd like to continue that discussion of cameras to segue to a controversial point of Internet of Things, and it's the idea that CCTV is it effective in reducing crime? And creating a more healthful cityscape? Is a greater proliferation of this kind of technology in other areas aside from those that are placed there by the city leaders itself, but the sort of IoT side of this, are we all living better because of a greater surveillance network or self-imposed surveillance network of this kind? And the answer from there's a fair amount of empirical data that this is true. There's low-level property crimes have reduced in areas where there are these CCTV systems, and other kinds of difficulties of the kind that Brent described tend to be occurring a little bit less as well. So this is generally a pretty good thing. I tend to think maybe that we are looking at a kind of urban environment that could be a lot better for everyone, but we've already seen so many times in the United States where there's different set of standards for wealthier people and poorer people along these lines. And as we are talking about this initiative in the developing world, I think a special set of sensitivities about that prospect of this sort of thing being used to bully and harass lower income people should be described as well.
Aditya, we're talking about policing in the smart city. What wisdom do you have to convey on us about the policing mechanism of a smart city?
I mean, I have a couple different things to say. One is unquestionably having the whole city on CCTV, having drones flying around, watching people, having license plate scanners on every entrance on the freeway, which is what they have in Sacramento, for example, already. These unquestionably make the city much, much safer. And in places where people do not fear the police, they unquestionably make them much, much safer as well. Even in places where they do, they make them much, much safer as well. But then obviously the problem becomes, police brutality and authoritarianism and bullying from both the police and the judiciary, because, many of the laws we've written are not really designed to be perfectly enforced. Right, like I just got a red light ticket in Sacramento, where Brent lives. Like, there's a red light camera on every intersection, and the tickets are like $600. And taking a right at a red light without stopping is a $600 ticket. That's something that people do all the time on empty suburban streets. Like, it's something you wouldn't think about twice if you're like a tourist. Especially at night. And there you go, I got a $600 ticket for that. So, and there's no way out of it. So, many of these systems are designed to brutalize and designed to intimidate. And then, of course, in China and other places which are authoritarian, these systems are then further enhanced through the same technologies like AI and machine learning and things like that to actually intimidate. So, like in China, apparently, when you go to a new part of town, like different displays will actually tell you your own name to remind you that you're being watched. Right, all the time, like, good job not crossing the street, Aditya, is like, what the sign would say, you're not jaywalking or whatever. The sign would tell you that, right? And it's only going to get more and more sophisticated and, intimidating. So I think one thing I'd like to say is that when it gets really intimidating like that, or is used for intimidation, then actually being in a surveillance society causes a lot of stress. Philip K. Dick actually had a real good quote about this that I'm not recalling exactly, but it was about, it's the very animal instinct we have that we know when a predator is watching, right? It raises your level of stress. And that's basically, when the whole system is being used to prey on you one way or another, then that does create a lot of stress. But, it's unquestionable that cities are much safer for these enhancements, and there's no way we're going to live without them. So,
some other ideas are centralized control rooms, digital surveillance, predictive policing, and coordinated emergency responses.
So community policing and community fines for traffic and things like that, I think are really going to be very important.
Fantastic. All right, so let's move on to transport, intelligent transport systems, integrated ticketing, smart travel cards, bike sharing, real-time passenger information, smart parking, logistics management, transport apps, dynamic road signs. Aditya, lead us out on your idea for a smart city transport system.
I mean, the thing that I'm the biggest fan of is just quite simply bike sharing. I think any city where the weather permits, bike sharing is the best thing possible. And the electric scooters are not bad either. And if they can have dedicated lanes as well, that would just be great, because they enable people to go that magic distance that previously you needed, an entire vehicle to travel. Right? Instead of waiting for the bus, you can just get around.
Fantastic. Brett, Nally, what do you think for a transport system of the future? Bolivia City, if you want. What do you think? Transport.
First, I want to say that I just met Aditya, right a few minutes before we went live, and I really like this guy. He's making some good points, and I can't argue with any of them. And at the high level, I just want people to understand that we don't want to create a society that is preying on the most weak and vulnerable. Okay, this is what psychopaths who get into high levels of any organization, whether it be government or corporation, like to do because they can make money out of it. It's the easiest thing that you can do in Sacramento or anywhere in the world, where you can set up some little bureaucracy system with the technology that we have now to start handing out $600 tickets to make more money for the police and the government. But is that making us safer? If nobody's around and you're making a right turn, And so I just really, really want people to have to think about this and to make sure that we're creating a society that is helpful for all people and not just preying on the weak and the most vulnerable, and that is the impoverished people in general and the less educated. So I just want to say that up front. And then Steele, now to kind of answer more of your question, living in a place like the San Francisco Bay Area, I never lived in San Francisco, but I worked there for about 3 years before at my last job at LinkedIn. And it's no coincidence that Uber was founded in San Francisco. In case people don't know, that's where it was founded by Travis Kalanick and his co-founders. And it happened there because there was a great need for it. You have wealthy people with a lot of money who have important jobs trying to get places faster, and it's a mess because the city was designed, over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And there's just too much traffic and congestion there. So the free market comes in, not government, the free market comes in and created Uber. And now we have the whole ride-hailing business, that's just taking off all over the world. And so now you see it with the bikes, and you even see it with the scooters. And I've ridden the Bird scooters. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. It chopped for a second,
Okay.
but it's good.
I was a little frozen on mine. I've ridden the Bird scooters. I've rented the bikes, ride-sharing bikes in various cities that I've been in. They're great. It's an awesome solution. But again, it's a free market solution. But I'm all for government policies, using those type of technologies, once again, to enhance the lives of people and to improve the city in general. I'll just want people to be very cautious that that's actually the right goal, because I've just seen it happen too many times where you have these people come in with very slick words and very great ideas, and they're saying that they're trying to help people, but what they end up doing is just running off with all the money and leaving the people who are the most desperate and who need the most help behind. So I want people to really think about that when we're thinking about these ideas.
Yeah, and the decentralization notion that you bring forward of the Uber is a paradigm shift in global commerce. Ben Zion, transport. I gave you guys some examples: intelligent transport systems, integrated ticketing, smart travel cards, bike sharing, real-time passenger information, smart parking, logistics management, transport apps, dynamic road signs. What do you think about smart cities and transport?
Yes, those are all outstanding programs. And I'd like to mention another kind of outstanding program that maybe underscores a little bit different kind of approach. We often speak of on this program and many times about Estonia, the fine work that they've done in digitalization. They have the world's highest functioning set of e-governance initiatives, including a fully realized blockchain voting system. They are also one of relatively few number of cities that has implemented free public transport in their capital city of Tallinn. And another city, the Flemish city in Belgium, Hasselt, they abolished fares in public transport back in 1997. And at that time, and in the years since, the use of that public transport has gone up about 15-fold. And that means that there's a lot less pollution. And it also means that working people are not constantly being basically charged some poor tax. And there are always good cases to be made for approaching some kinds of things as free goods or public goods. And it's a very common attitude for, Brent mentioned a kind of predatory behavior. But there's a sort of larger problem in responding to this sort of thing, a feeling that is somehow unfair to give a lot of the expenditure in running these kind of public transport systems. A lot of the cost derives from forcing people to have a paywall at every turn. If you remove that need to be fair in charging people money for something, you're actually removing a lot of the cost of those systems. And this idea that we have in America, there's no such a thing as a free lunch or the Protestant work ethic and so forth. These are actually ideas that are inhibiting good solutions to ordinary problems along on the order of magnitude of the kinds of nuisances that we've described about driving. We want to, of course, remove those nuisances, but we also want to incentivize people to be driving less. This is a serious problem in our world, is a lot of consumption of fossil fuels. And so just as Aditya mentioned this bike sharing program, I think it's pretty reasonable to describe free public transport as a good solution in the world's many urban environs to some of these kinds of problems. Is this specifically a smart city feature? I would contend that it is. I'd like to see those other kinds of public-private solutions and private solutions that you described being used to a much higher degree as well. But I think that this is an important one that is often disregarded out of hand. And I think that we should consider that this sort of thing does improve the functioning of a city and does improve other areas of the marketplace, just as providing a Wi-Fi in environments makes life easier and allows people to get more done, and doesn't create an arbitrary set of encumbrances that affects everyone's lives slightly to the negative.
Aditya, you were trying to jump in there. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just saying that in my opinion, the good shouldn't be free, but instead micropayments should be built into the just digital infrastructure of the nation. And perhaps you guys can offer me a perspective of how this could work with cryptocurrency as well. If I can send anybody a fraction of a penny anytime just by using my face, for example, then I can be billed for my usage on the public transit system just by getting on the bus. Like it's the same way, when you land in an airport, like why does the customs official need to ask you anything? The NSA already knows who you are. You should just be able to walk, directly out. Like why would you, it's just theater. So I think it's quite important that, goods not be free, but instead be metered, and the customers actually know what they're paying and know what they're paying for, like the usage, but that the cost should be incredibly minimal. So because just being able to track your usage is something that's quite important to prevent senseless overconsumption. Otherwise, you have people who build entire businesses and ways of life on, just living in a way that's just actually very unsustainable one way or another. And then the market's not able to exert its, just like supercommuters and stuff. People supercommute because gas is so cheap. But it's just not a healthy way to live. If gas was free, it'll be like Iran. Actually, in Iran, that's the problem they have, right? Gas is so cheap that even a small price increase just destroys the entire country.
Yeah. All right. I
would want to say that we basically do have the opposite problem right now, where the overuse of fossil fuels is a serious threat to the stability and ongoing existence of many species, to some degree, including our own. And something like a zero fare system being encouraged in municipalities and more driving being discouraged seems to be a pretty well understood a way of trying to reduce that set of problems. But there's certainly, I think that the point of having people still sort of being clocked as they're using that, and maybe reducing the prospect for some kind of manipulation of the system is well taken.
Yeah, couldn't they have like a transport cryptocurrency that they just used for this, and then whether they actually have to settle their balance in real currency, by real, I mean any other currency, would just be determined based on income level or something?
Well, um, I'll take that one if that's okay, guys. There's no reason to create like a transportation per se cryptocurrency. We already have cryptocurrencies right now that work for micropayments. And unfortunately, Bitcoin is no longer one of those. Bitcoin was really good for micropayments when it was first started, but now there's too many transactions on the actual Bitcoin blockchain. So they're now have built something called the Lightning Network that was theorized for years and is being built, and it's continuing to be built upon. But I think that Lightning Network has fundamental flaws that are not going to be solved due to the actual engineering of how Lightning Network is created and what it is. So it's Lightning Network is kind of more of like an ATM. So you would maybe put $200 or $300 on there if you're a typical American, where you wouldn't want to lose $200 and $300, but it wouldn't cripple you financially if you lost that. So the Lightning Network, essentially, you have a channel where that sits on there, and that money is way less secure than on the Bitcoin blockchain. But you could use that for micropayments. But a much simpler solution, in my opinion, is using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin Cash that Roger Ver now promotes instead of Bitcoin, that can do micropayments right now. So I could send you a penny, or I could send you a fraction of a United States penny right now, and it would be, a fraction of a penny to send that, and it would be fast, cheap, and reliable. In other words, I could send that to you in less than a second. Nobody can stop it. No government entity can stop that. And so I think that these proposals that we have for micropayments could easily be done on a cryptocurrency network like Bitcoin Cash right now.
Yeah, I was suggesting though that all city services could then be issued in the city's currency, and then when you actually settle your bill, you do so on the basis of your income. So
well, that's the thing about cryptocurrencies is the transaction is simultaneously the settlement. Like that's the whole idea.
Most cities do have some sort of a reduced fare program that operate in the spirit of that notion.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it would be pretty cool if like the city, all your bills for utilities came in a different, like just a different currency, and then when you actually had to settle the bill with the city or with the service providers, they would then calculate, because then your usage of everything can be tracked across the board using a single token, I guess, a common denominator.
Yeah, well, you'd have a competition between city currencies, right? Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think the problem with that comes centralization. If you have each one of these municipalities creating their own cryptocurrency, their own coin, then you have to make sure that coin is stable. That's why stable coins are getting more popular now. If you don't want people to then essentially be investors. So I don't know if we really want to talk a lot about cryptocurrency right now, but just to address Aditya's point real quick, I mean, cryptocurrencies are highly volatile if they're not a stable coin, but stable coins are becoming more popular now. Like Tether was the original stable coin, and now there's USDT coin, United States dollar token. And the reason why those are becoming more popular is because they behave kind of more like traditional fiat currencies, like at least the big ones, like the dollar, the euro, the yen, where they're very stable. And you don't have to worry about your fiat currency losing crazy amounts of value overnight, like the sadly.
I could see you having, along with the Aditya's idea, I could see you having something like a city credit, right? So this credit could get you, energy, or it could get you on a train, or it could get you, a service, some sort of service. I mean, I could see you having city credit tied to a cryptocurrency that's on a larger network than just the municipality or on a fiat currency or something like that. But a city credit, I could see happening. Talking about all this sort of stuff, let's go to energy. Ben, you haven't spoken in a while. Smart grids, smart meters, smart usage apps, smart lighting. Do you see when you hear of a planned city? Are you excited? Would you advocate for smart energy grids and smart energy?
I mean, this kind of thing is one of the earlier usages of advanced algorithms, is to make these systems work a little bit better, and we're going to increasingly see more and more of that. And it's an important part of 21st century urban planning. It's there's a lot of possible new uses for energy at the national level, or in new markets that would certainly be of interest to some of this as well. I thought I would very briefly also mention, as we're talking about South America, that Brazil has a popular social movement in the free fare movement, calling back the last discussion. So they do have people who are clamoring for this use of a public transport system to be having guarantee of free fares. And in that context of what you mentioned just moments ago, about some kind of credit system wherein residents of this municipality have some kind of a durable profile with which some resources are associated. I think it's of interest to futurists because there's a lot of things, new kinds of things, like new ways of using augmented reality, other organizing principles for a community that could be incorporated into something where there's a tie-in between your profile and your dealings with the municipality to a higher degree. That's an area that I think it would be one that we could discuss at greater length. As far as energy, I think that it's an incredible subject, and it's one where we anytime we're reducing those impacts and making things more efficient, that is something that we do need to focus on. And even cities that we don't regard as smart cities are getting better and better at doing this every day.
Aditya?
I think any modern smart city, or any city really, and this will happen even in the US too, at least in California, should socialize like urban farming, right? Especially because it links, and also like it's kind of part of sewage treatment and waste management too. Like, how do you take the compostable stuff and then reuse it, gracefully? So I think any smart city you'd set up today, especially in a third world place like Bolivia, definitely you would want to socialize a high amount of just farming, because you have all this excess power, you have this excess water, you have excess compost. And these days, it's the new wisdom to actually grow a lot of fruits and vegetables in the city itself, often vertically, right? So actually that is something a city should just socialize, in my opinion. Even if the actual work is done by private farmers, the city has all the resources.
We'll move on to that one in a sec. That is a good one, the urban farming idea. Brett, Nally, what do you think about energy, smart grids, smart meters, energy usage apps, smart lighting? Do you think this should be a sort of a mandatory, common sense idea for a planned city?
I mean, it sounds like it in theory. They're all great ideas. I know many friends and family members who've installed a lot of the latest technology in their home. Yesterday was Christmas. One of the main reason that my wife and I moved here to Folsom is because my in-laws, my wife's parents, moved to El Dorado Hills, about 15 minutes away from us. And they moved here because my wife's brother decided to start organic farming, buying 37 acres, quit your job at Amazon, developing high tech that you've been doing for 5-6 years, and he's an electrical engineer, and start farming. Who would have thought? And in 2019, that almost 2020, that's the world we're living in. But that's why we moved out here. And so my wife's parents redid their entire home. They bought a home. It's about a 20-year-old home, but they basically remodeled the whole thing. And I watched it happen this year. And they've installed Alexa throughout the whole house, basically. So the whole house is smart now. Alexa, chandelier on, and the chandelier turns on. Is that cool? Is that awesome? Does it improve our life using technology? Yes. Are there some little pitfalls of it right now? He was just telling me last night, my wife's father, that you can't, a word is too close to call. So they want to turn hall lights on, Alexa, but Alexa can't pick that up because hall sounds too much like call. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that the answer is yes. These technologies clearly improve our lives. We all want them. They're great. But the answer is really always going to come down to what are the underlying economics of the particular situation? Is this affordable? Is this the greatest need for the individuals there? I mean, are the people in Bolivia just trying to get clean water, clean food, feed their families, educate their kids? I mean, I think that those things are much higher and a greater level of importance than, having a smart light turn on certain things. But it doesn't mean that those things like smart lights aren't good and that we shouldn't want them, but we should all remember that there is a hierarchical level of needs here, like Maslow's hierarchical level of needs. And my common theme here that I'm bringing up is let's make sure we understand all the details here. Let's look at the data, and let's make sure that we interpret that data rationally and that we're always focused on improving the lives of people, not just going techno-futurist crazy, in a place like Bolivia where maybe they just need some clean water and basic sanitation first and foremost.
It's really unfortunate that Dr. Manu can't be here to explain exactly what the strategic idea behind this city is. I mean, yes, if you really want to talk about it, absolutely, it's an impoverished country, and they're building a smart city. But the reason behind it, I mean, Dr. Manu could have answered this for us. Is it an investment where they want to turn it into a place that attracts foreign capital, that they want to attract bright minds so that they can improve the living conditions of the Bolivians around them? Is this going to be some sort of elitist city where they're going to ignore the problems of Greater Bolivia? I'm not sure. And Dr. Manu was the only one who could have really answered that for us. So we're beating around the bush on this a little bit. And I'm not going to pretend I understand either 100%. My guess is that, if you're the central government in Bolivia, you obviously have to care about, macro Bolivia. I don't think this is would be some sort of elitist enterprise where they're just going to wall themselves off in some sort of smart city castle. I think that there would be a more macro idea. I mean, otherwise they're just going to get overrun. I mean, these people in the other places might just, off with their heads type idea. I'm not sure. But only Dr. Manu could have answered that for us. I think, on a real level, but he's not here. So unfortunately, that's not the case. But I do agree with you, though. I mean, an investment in Bolivia's poor population, absolutely. I mean, why not? But maybe this is calculated to be a better investment for the health of Bolivia, especially since it will never get a port unless they go to war with Chile. And they have been to war with Chile a few different times throughout their history. Do they really want to go to war with Chile again? I'm not sure. There's a lot of subversive processes between those two countries. It has been. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, they could be reinvesting it into their military. In order to attack Chile. And Chile, I mean, I've actually got a few Chilean people who are at my work. Now, these aren't policy analysts, or these are just normal everyday Chileans. And I was just joking with them, talking about whether or not they would like to give Bolivia its land back, because Chile did invade Bolivia and took that ocean off them, and they said no, they're not going to do it. It's just standard. Chileans are not going to. They're not exactly in favor of giving Bolivia that sea access back. So I mean, they could be using this lithium boom to reinvest in their military to invade Chile. I don't know, but only Dr. Manu could have really answered these questions for us. But they want to build a smart city. The innovation center is opening up. Benzine's turning on his head. Who didn't know? Who were we up to? Was it Benzine? Were you talking about? Oh no, Aditya, smart energy. Oh no, we've gone through everyone. We'll talk about farming, urban farming. Benzine. Aditya mentioned urban farming. What do you think about urban farming?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if we had a technical difficulty there a moment ago. Yeah, I think that using this kind of technology for vertical farming and better use of limited space and resources, that's a very good thing for a municipality to invest in. So I would tend to echo what Aditya said, that this is a worthy investment. And the question of whether this smart city itself is a worthy investment, it's an open question in a country that's having some difficulties right now, and we could argue as to whether those difficulties are caused purely by domestic forces or by more international machinations. But we should also consider the role of becoming a tech hub itself. This Santa Cruz smart city is intended to turn Bolivia into a regional tech power, and such a gambit, where it's successful, has incredible implications for the region and for the Bolivian people that should not be casually dismissed. But the question of whether that is something that is likely or achievable in resulting from this initiative or policies of this kind in the present political climate, it's an interesting one, and one that I would like to discuss, but I don't know how much I can really look into the crystal ball and see that with the information that I have.
Yeah, it is a bit hard without Dr. Manu here, and I apologize about that, Brett Nally. These are answers that we can't actually guess at. Only Dr. Manu would really know, and I do apologize for that. And I don't know. I haven't. There isn't enough information on the ground about from Dr. Manu or from the official websites that I could ascertain as to the strategy of Greater Bolivia and as to how this will impact the macro idea. You can only hazard a guess. Aditya, you mentioned urban farming. Would you like to expand on that, or just, you can also talk about this notion of what we're talking about, a smart city in the middle of a poor country? Is it an elitist project, or would it be beneficial? What would hazard a guess on you? I mean, in India, you can draw that experience from India if you want.
Yeah, they have a huge so when they use smart cities in the global south, what they just mean is that all the resources of the city are metered very efficiently. Because most of these cities, the biggest problem they have is, well, there are a couple of them, but one of the biggest is that water is usually very scarce, for example, like literally, right? Because there's too many people given the amount of clean water that's available. So it actually needs to be metered in a way that, honestly, in the US, we should start doing it too. It's just really a laggard in this particular regard, right? And so along with water, the other thing is that, so that's basically what makes the city smart, that you can do that. So like, I know, for example, in Cape Town in South Africa, they do a really good job of metering the water because they were about to hit zero water, right? And they do a really good job of that, and they do a really good job of waste management as well, just because the two are kind of linked to each other in people's minds, right? When you want to keep clean water, you want to make sure your trash and sewage are all like well organized too. So my point was that when you have all these resources being centrally organized by a body for once, to this degree, then you'll have everything you need to make a farm. Like you'll have all the components. So you may as well socialize that part of it as well, especially given that people are poor and they don't. So this is another thing that relates to the thing is that another thing that makes the city smart is that they be able to actually use finance. And when I say finance, I don't mean it in some literal way. Is in they're actually able to calculate what the short-term versus long-term cost of different things are, and they're able to use things do things long-term. So a lot of these places, people are doing extremely inefficient and awful things like burning trash as fuel, for example, right? Just to heat their homes. So obviously it's much smarter as long as you are able to build a balance sheet and just get a small amount of financing to just get a really eco-friendly, smart system. You just have to calculate the cost over a period of between 5 and 20 years, right? So the main thing is like all these systems we've described, they're very economical. They're just economical only once you're able to plan things financially.
Yeah,
So that's the other thing that makes the city smart, and that's why even with the urban farm, it makes more sense for the whole city to do it because people are going to have small homes, they're going to have small lots. Like farming is not going to occur to them because they just don't individually have the resources for it. But the city as a whole surely does.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Speaking of waste, compactor bins, dynamic routing, and collection. Aditya, did you have any more to expand on waste, and then I'll throw it over to these other guys.
No, that was pretty much it, I think.
All right.
Well, I guess I have seen a bunch of smart. They just the word smart is very overloaded. It also means like voice activated assistants, and it also means smart home entertainment. But when they use smart, mainly they mean not only the main thrust is the Internet of Things and sensors, but beyond that there's the capital management and the ability to plan things and then change them based on analytics. And then I guess shoot, now my point has completely escaped me, but I had one.
All right, so Ben Zion, we're talking about waste collection. So Aditya said something very interesting. So basically, once you have a smart city that's, you can calculate into it the amount of waste you collect, of water, etc., and you can do urban farming off it. But there's also other smart waste ideas like compactor bins, dynamic routing, and collection. So you can reduce the amount of kinetic energy that's involved with waste collection. What do you say on waste collection?
Just before you jump into it, I remembered my point. In Israel, in particular, they have a really good system of because they also a very low water country. They are really big on turning their sewage water back into drinking water and being able to do so naturally through stages. So they have a whole system where they create like a system of lakes, kind of, and with specialized kinds of algae in them, so that they go all the way from being raw sewage to being these kind of gardens, like mushroom gardens and stuff. And then at the end of the system, with a bit of sewage treatment, you actually get drinking water. I just wanted to throw that in there. So in Israel, this is a technology. In Israel in particular, markets these smart solutions worldwide to other jurisdictions, and they're quite economical once you plan for them the way I described.
Yeah, desalination is the other good one in that, and you can find both in especially in dry environments. Waste collection, Ben Zion 2020. What do you think about waste collection?
Yeah, well, I would say what I would say about efficiency in the energy management and systems. What I would say about removing the extraneous paywalls in the public transit systems, that any time that we're able to have more elegant algorithms and a higher degree of automation in these systems, people benefit. And there's a separate question on a certain number of city workers losing their jobs to this automation. I think that is generally a great problem of the 20th and 21st century, that automation and today advanced algorithms are improving systems and making them more elegant, but also leading to a very real slow motion effect of the jobless apocalypse. That is very much a story of the Rust Belt of the 20th century. It's going to increasingly be the next 15 years. We'll have 40% of jobs automated out of existence. So we can't only look at the one side of this, how elegant all of these things are. We also have to consider things like basic income schemes and other solutions to people losing their jobs. And this is doubly true in the developing world, that we have to be sensitive to these things. Overall, I would say that of waste management, that this is an excellent development, and these kinds of systems should be implemented in multiple disciplines as soon as possible. We like better use of energy and other things. Many of these features are increasingly a part of our present day urban landscapes, whether these cities have an official smart designation or official mandate to be using more Internet of Things type technologies, are still automating to a high degree.
And I just want to say thank you to all the audience who's joining us right now. Thanks always to Mike DeVerde. You're the best, Mike. I love you so much. All right, Brett, Nally, you've heard the other guys. What's your idea on waste management? And I do apologize again for Dr. Manu not being available. We'll have him on at some point, and we'll sort out some of those other questions that you have. But waste management, what do you think? And you heard about turning it into drinking water, which is very exciting as well. What do you say?
All great points for the most part in general by Aditya and Ben, so I don't want to reiterate or echo what they've said. What I will say is kind of a higher level. One thing that people might not understand the trend is that for many years, the Western world and the US in general was shipping all of our waste to China. Well, China's not taking our garbage anymore because they've grown dramatically as an economy. So waste management is something that isn't sexy, and it's something that I do think the mob controls in certain ways more than people understand, which is a whole different rabbit hole in conversation. But it is a reality that I've kind of investigated over the years that it does seem to be true. But it is important, and you know, whether you love or hate or somewhere in the middle of Bill Gates, he has been working on sanitation for many years in very poor areas like Africa, and he has had some very interesting ideas for great innovation in things like sanitation. So I'll leave it at that regarding those things. I kind of already mentioned that previously during this discussion, that basic sanitation should not be underestimated. It's very important. It should be considered a global human right. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yep, sanitation should be considered a global human right. Very good analysis there. All right, so you guys were all over the place today. All right, that's all right. So no city evolves in isolation. No city is isolated. Aditya, I'll start with you. The environment, right? So talking about the city and the environment, you know, pollution, noise, weather, land movement, flood management. What do you say on these fronts? Again, unfortunately, Dr. Manu's not here to talk about Santa Cruz. I'm not sure exactly what the environment is like that, but what do you say about the environment in general? Pollution especially is a huge problem, and I know that a lot of these planned cities would have been much better if there had been some pollution controls and pollution mechanisms.
Well, the number one way to control pollution.
Oh, he's gone.
I'm here. So the number one way to control pollution when you can't control the source of the pollution is by building gardens, actually, of certain kinds that actually suck a lot of pollution out of the air. So once again, that's the kind of thing that if your city is well planned, it can socialize. You know, you can do all kinds of cool things.
So you said gardens, is that right? I just missed that a little bit.
Yeah, the gardens. There's specific kinds, especially in New Delhi, which is now the world's most polluted city. In fact, in the middle of some of the gardens, the air quality is normal. So there's actually there's a lot of like research being done on this in India actually, because they can't control the source of pollution. So, what's the best way to improve the air quality, especially outdoors? And yeah, there's different kinds of gardens you can grow that are pretty good at this.
Yeah. Okay. So Ben Zion, we're talking about smart cities and the environment, pollution, noise, weather, land movement, flood management. What do you say about those ideas? Cities and the environment. Obviously, location, like any real estate. But what else do you think?
Yes, there's after the concerns about reducing environmental pollutants contributing to problems like climate change. We should mostly urban planners think about the quality of life of the citizens there, and so questions about coming into contact with things that they find unpleasant, the noise pollution, a high level of light pollution, whatever particulates that would not be healthy but also unpleasant. These are serious concerns, and as Aditya mentioned, there's any number of quite large cities that have problems of this kind that are contributing substantively to public health crises. Even the lovely city of Los Angeles has a pretty high level of environmental pollutants in the air relative to other North American cities. That is something that contributes to ill health in that city. So we have to be finding better ways to. It's why I would again something that I already spoke to maybe more than I should have, but why we should consider biting the bullet and incentivizing the more widespread use of public transit by treating this free good. It really does make these cities easier to navigate and cleaner. And so I think this is a very good approach. But there's a lot of other approaches from using emerging technology to see that these are better handled as well.
Yeah, and in the city I'm living in, Melbourne, is quite a large city, 5 or 6 million people here, and we've won year over year over year over year the world's most livable city. And I think they want to continue that because they're expanding the environmental side of things. They're expanding massively on this urban transport network. They're expanding the train network. They're expanding accessibility to Uber spots, to smart transport spots, and they've knocked over a lot of buildings, and they're building a lot of intercity environmental places like parks. They're expanding the park network quite dramatically. And they're also doing a lot of things like smart building and smart construction of where exactly they build it, because they're not going to stop building these mega skyscrapers, but they are busily planting these skyscrapers where it's good for airflow, for example. So you know, in the old days in New York, it's just a scatterbrain of large buildings. But as we know that if you need certain airflows, and so in Melbourne here, they're making sure that once you get a wind tunnel, that they build to make sure that airflow is maximized to push any of the pollutants out of the city. It's really good here in Melbourne, Australia. Year after year after year of that top spot, and they're trying to keep that. And there's lots and lots of innovations going on, and also there's a pollutant sort of fences that are going up as well that capture these bad air pollutants. Really cool stuff. What do you say, Brett Nally? It's air pollution. We've also got automated flood networks here, so the anticipation of rising sea level, they're starting to do that as well. What do you say about the environment, Brett Nally, in terms of pollution, noise, weather, land movement, flood management, the smart city idea? of the environment?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of scan the camera back and show you guys the shirt that I'm wearing. So I don't know if we have any South Park watchers here, but yesterday for Christmas, my brother-in-law, I keep telling him he's the one who decided to quit his job at Amazon, being a manager, managing multiple people, I think somewhere around 90 people, helping develop things like advanced technology like the Kindle many years ago, and then Amazon's Alexa. Brilliant person, electrical engineer. He gave all that up to go buy 37 acres and start farming, and he knew nothing, almost nothing about farming. He's been teaching himself, and this was about 2 years ago. And I've been telling him, his name's Dan, I say, Dan, you gotta watch South Park. I mean, they're crushing it. It's hilarious. I encourage everybody to be watching South Park because we need a little bit of humor sometimes in our life with all the crazy things going on. And right now, the past 2 seasons, what's been going on is Tegrity Farms, the shirt that I'm wearing. He got me this shirt yesterday for Christmas. And it's kind of funny, but it's sometimes we have to go backwards in order to go forwards. In other words, sometimes we have to remember the things that work and the way that life was in order to make sure that we're living sustainably, make sure that we're not destroying the environment and polluting. And sometimes, some of the answers that might seem the most difficult to solve or to answer, or questions, to answer, could be as simple as just looking at our past and our ancestors and what they did. And I think that organic, sustainable farming in any capacity, whether doing that in the city, on top of buildings, or new forms of sustainable agriculture, or some of the older forms are what we should be focusing on. Sustainability is the key. So I want to kind of just leave it at that regarding farming. And I thought it was funny that I had this t-shirt on and didn't show you guys until just now.
Brett, Nally, a really quick one. Just spend 30 seconds on this one because I want to actually go on to education in a second. But homelessness is a huge issue in the United States and around the world. How would you see a smart city accommodating homelessness? How would you see it, in a lack of a word, combating homelessness, or making accommodations for homelessness?
It's a really great question, Steele, and we're not going to solve it in 30 seconds, but I'll try and give you the high level like I always do. So
you can spend as much time as you want. It's all right.
The devil's in the details like everything else, and a lot of people don't realize that at least in the U.S., about 25% of homelessness are war veterans. So the first thing that we could start doing is stop going to war with all these people across the world that we don't really know. So that would nip that in the butt. And the second thing to understand is that most of these people who are homeless, legitimately homeless, have mental problems, deep mental problems. People who run into financial problems but have sound mind can normally find some type of community outreach to help them. But the homelessness in particularly California and the big cities like San Francisco, Santa Cruz, San Diego is getting pretty well out of control. And it's pretty sad to see if you walk about those streets. And, it's a reflection of our society. These are not easy questions to answer. We need to take a good look at ourselves and saying, why is this happening? What should we be doing? We are all one people, we're all connected, whether we realize it or not. And the catch-20, I'll leave you on this. The catch-22 about homelessness is that the cities like Santa Cruz, California, that try to take a more positive and altruistic stance to homelessness actually end up encouraging and incentivizing it in a way. So more homeless keep on moving there. And then I have friends, my friend Brandon Thomas, who's my chiropractor friend, he's trying to do good and trying to be a small business owner and help people who need chiropractic care. Meanwhile, have been a lot of homeless gathering right in front of his building where he's trying to give chiropractic care. And, the fact of the matter is that it has affected his business. Everybody wants to help the homeless when you're asked about it, but the fact of the matter is that people just don't want to be around them. So it's that catch-22. And, the answers are not easy, but I think it can start with what what causes it, and we know some of the ways that cause it. And it leads back to education, actually caring about your neighbor, caring about the people around you. And it's not an easy task to solve. So I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Wow, good answer. Thank you. Ben Zion 2020, homelessness and smart city accommodation. What do you think?
Yes. Well, I think there's interesting potential applications for example, a higher level of automation or streamlining of the process of entering a homeless shelter by tying it to a smartphone app. We have it's been weakened, but we have in California there is a system wherein low-income people have their food stamps matched with a state fund, so they would get basically the $200 in food stamps and an additional $200 in cash. That's something that most any homeless person could get. I mean, you could be creating a new kind of shelter or a new kind of hostel wherein you're not having to interact with a lot of security guards and personnel, but rather just entering through a more automated set of checkpoints. That would reduce a lot of the stress potentially for being in places like this. It would reduce a lot of the costs. Much of the cost of running these places are personnel. And if you're able to remove a few of these difficulties, that would possibly make these places a little bit less of these flashpoints of violence and unpleasantness. That is one interesting prospect. I'd like to say that generally, I would that homelessness is a serious problem in the United States. I think that I just want to reiterate that it seems to be largely an economic problem. This is why there's popular candidates who are pushing for these $1 trillion approaches to viewing housing as a civil right, and these are pretty popular. There is an awful lot of sort of runaway housing costs in the United States. 55% of the people in the United States are working in the service industry. They're making somewhat artificially low wages, and the housing costs have gone up so much over recent decades. This is not a tenable situation. So when we say something like homelessness is a result of mental health, I think there's a lot of articles have been written about how the mental health is an incidental effect of the economic insecurity and other problems, and I think should be open to viewing this in this light as well.
Aditya, homelessness and smart city accommodation / integration. What do you say?
Steele, can I address that last point just real briefly before we move on?
Yeah.
And I've actually seen this happen in my life with certain friends and not really family members, but more friends and acquaintances. We talked about people going off to war, right? And then PTSD, and then coming back and maybe not having the best economic opportunities and leading into homelessness with mental health in certain scenarios. But let's talk about even before that. A lot of people are predatory war, and they don't feel like they have any other options because they don't feel like they have good enough education and they can't get a job. So they end up going to work for the military. So I've seen that happen many times. So actually the rabbit hole even goes further than what I mentioned, with the root cause of these problems. It always leads back to not good enough education and, people not caring enough about their neighbor and thinking long-term about the problems that are arising from certain actions. So I want to leave it at that.
Wow, fantastic. Aditya, what do you say on homelessness and smart city integration?
I mean, the thing is, the Helsinki, I believe, is the first city in a while to reach zero homeless people. And I think they did it just by building enough affordable housing and additionally extending enough mental health resources to make sure that some of the people who, they were comfortable moving into this housing. And then, it's too early for them to say what the results will be, but anecdotally, obviously the streets are much better, so business is flourishing and people feel much safer and happier on the street. And most people actually really tend to get their act together, like people who are seriously depressed or have a history of substance abuse. Once they have a home and they have some stability and a mental health counselor as well, they're usually able to put their lives together in a structured way. So it actually, you need the housing before you can have the structure, because out on the street, with the bad weather and people moving your stuff around and your own insecurities, it's hard to get anything together. So yeah, so free housing, definitely for people who can't afford it, is definitely something that should be a civil right, I think. That would definitely help solve the problem. Uh, I think another thing I like to say about the housing affordability crisis is, it's really about the reason this crisis got so out of hand is because the interest rates by the Federal Reserve are just way too low, and they're purposely way too low so that Wall Street can and bully other foreign banks as well, gang up and just issue as many home loans and resell that debt as wide and as far as possible. Is the reason why everywhere you go in the whole world, housing is unaffordable. And once that trend occurs, people are reluctant to build more housing because now they're just trying to protect the value of their housing because the loans mean so much to them. So unraveling that whole conundrum is just going to be a huge thing. Like in San Francisco Bay Area, you could solve all problems. Like, this is America, a very rich country. You could immediately solve not all problems, but if you just had the California government give a guarantee that if you're low income, which like Obamacare is like a reasonable definition, like 600%. If you make less than 60 grand a year in California now, you get a subsidy on your health insurance, right? So that's like a reasonable definition of low to medium income. If you get a housing subsidy where, let's say, like, you're guaranteed a bedroom for $500 a month, and you're guaranteed a one-bedroom apartment for $1,000 a month, regardless of where you are in the state, all of a sudden, I mean, it's already an economic miracle, but suddenly the economic miracle will be shared with such a wider swath of society,
Yeah, totally agree. All right, well, we'll spend the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes on education, and then I think we'll call it. Well, very quickly as well. No, just education. Yep, let's just do that. So we'll go back the other way. Aditya, what do you say on education? Do you think there needs to be an education system, any sort of education system inside a smart city because of the internet, or do you think there still needs to be some sort of formal structure? What would you do with education and a smart city?
I mean, that's a very good question. I definitely, education is the missing link. But the thing is that there's two parts. Is the education need not be just for children, but also for adults, because the point is there's so many illiterate and undertrained adults who also want to reskill themselves and things like that. So whatever education is available, like community colleges, honestly, to me, are the best possible resource available. That and primary education, K through 12. And then the other thing is that I think that's what's very important in any city. Smart. I mean, all cities should be smart, I guess, right? Is that the culture of the city is people should be encouraged to innovate and display their innovation in the public sphere. So like public art is really important. Hacker spaces are really important. Different sorts of informal, like having access to like a or you can race, different sorts of automated vehicles, having different competitions that are public. These are really important because that's really how innovation occurs, when people learn that they can experiment and they learn they can also compete. Because incentives are as important as education, because most people are not just incentivized to educate themselves, and just the job away from the person where they are today. They need to get in the habit of just getting smarter.
Great thinking there. Great dynamic thinking there. Benzion 2020 education. What do you say?
Well, it's a great problem of the early to mid 21st century is anticipating how technologies are going to change the way that we interact with information, the speed and the ease with which we interact with systems and information. It's not an easy question to answer. So whatever our immediate objectives for education might be, those things we have to be open to moving those goalposts quite quickly in the coming years. I want to. I actually want to in service to this idea of education and good outcomes. I want to call back something that was that we were discussing a few moments ago about veterans entering the workforce. A serious failing of our society, a serious failing of Veterans Affairs Administration, and there's a lot of talk from a few Democratic candidates for president about a federal jobs guarantee, and I would think that of all the programs that could incorporate such a thing, a veterans federal jobs guarantee would be an interesting approach. It's not that these people don't have useful skill sets. It's that we do not have systems to facilitate their reentry into society, and there is a stigmatization. There is oftentimes a fear of people, or a reticence to interact with people, a lack of insight into understanding what they've been through and helping them to reacclimate to society. So I would think that that would be a worthy endeavor to have a jobs guarantee for this specific subset of the population. And I think that this does kind of speak to these educational objectives and broad objectives of this kind in a world where we're having things like highly facile natural language processing, NLP, and more and more advanced interfaces. Jose Cordero, our friend, he describes a world in a decade plus where basically everyone is telepathic and has access to a tremendous amount of advanced interfaces and algorithms that changes the definition of what it is to be literate. It changes it when we must be adjusting our goals there. And I think that a good approach to this is to attempt to create programs that foster entrepreneurship in all communities, particularly underserved communities, and allow people to be engaging these new technologies at the earliest point of that they come to market.
Brett, Nally, what do you say on education?
First, I want to say great points by Aditya and Ben. One thing that I don't believe that I heard was e-learning. And my last job was at LinkedIn. I was at lynda.com, and then we got acquired by LinkedIn, and we evolved it into LinkedIn Learning. And there's many e-learning platforms out there in the world, and there will be many more, and the industry will continue to evolve and serve people in ways that we can't fully understand. So I'm not just here to promote LinkedIn Learning. But from my time there, I can tell you a few things that are very clear. The educational system is absolutely failing our children right now in the United States of America, and I'd say in most Western countries. And it's not even like close, it's pitiful. They're teaching a bunch of superfluous information that is not relevant to people anymore. It's outdated. Kids need to actually learn relevant information. This is, soft skills are very important, and soft skills are lacking dramatically in kids coming out into the workforce. So for people who aren't familiar with those terms, soft skills are basically doing what we're doing right now, being able to have a conversation, look somebody in the eye, shake their hand. And I had the opportunity to speak at Monte Vista High School, which is in Cupertino, California, right by where Apple is. This is one of the best STEM schools in the country: science, technology, engineering, and math. And a friend of mine's a counselor there and asked me to come speak. They wanted a person in sales from Silicon Valley Tech to come and speak. And I thought it was going to be bad seeing some of they're juniors, because it was career night when I spoke. So these are juniors looking to go to college, and their parents were there. And some of these kids, who were some of the brightest kids again in the country from a STEM perspective, which is very important, they couldn't even look me in the eye or hold a conversation or get out a few words without stuttering. So I was kind of appalled and saddened to see that. So I'd say, again, like, let's get back to the basics. Let's try and focus on what works. If you're confused about what you should be learning, look at where technology is heading. I mean, I was in data storage from 2010 to 13, went through an acquisition there and did pretty well because data storage was growing. But then I realized that hardware was dying and software was where it was at. So I went to a video conference company, and video conferencing, look at what we're doing right now. We're solving the energy problem right now by communicating in this manner. And this is Skype and Zoom and many other video conferencing platforms will continue to evolve. So maybe look at that. And then e-learning, I already mentioned that as well too. When it comes to energy also, I'm an investor in Tesla because I strongly believe that we have to create sustainable energy. We have to get off the fossil fuel combustible engine paradigm. And other companies are kind of being forced into doing this because of leadership of people like Elon Musk and Tesla. So regardless of what you think about their stock price or this or that, like, the fundamentals are very, very clear. We have to get off fossil fuels. We just have to, and we have to get off the combustible engines. So follow people who are actually strong leaders who are pointing out objective truths that will stay objective truths and that are very important things that will change people's lives. That's kind of what I want to leave the viewers with today.
That's a fantastic point. It's good that you mentioned Elon Musk there at the end, because that's the whole basis of the wealth right there, the lithium product that we were talking about at the start, in order to build this city in Bolivia. All right, thank you, everybody. I don't know where Ben went. Ben's gone again. But anyway, thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. He's back. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today on another episode of Detonation, where we're putting death out of business, because I just want to thank everybody for talking, Brett Nally, to Aditya, and to Benzion 2020, of course. Thank you all for coming on today to talk about this smart city project and smart cities in general. We apologize for not having Dr. Manu on to enlighten us on some of the other finer points that we were going to ask him about, to specifics with this city. But that's okay. We had a good conversation anyway. We went around. The one which we should have talked about, which we didn't get time to do, was privacy. How would we secure privacy in a smart city, especially with lots of surveillance and stuff? That's fine. We'll talk about that another time. But thank you very much, Brett Nally, Benzion, and Aditya, for coming on to talk about this stuff with me. Thanks to all the viewers, and Thrivus is officially coming on as a sponsor of the show as well, so we will have deals for you with that. So hang around for that. If you're a viewer, you're going to get some Thrivus deals in the bottom there, so that'll be good. So hang around for that next show. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. You're the best. We love you. Give it a thumbs up, and we'll all see you on different shows related to different transhumanist and technology and geopolitical and economic and scholarly empirical topics soon. Thank you, everybody, and we love you all.
Bye.
Hey, and I just wanted to say, speaking of lapses in soft skills, wasn't feeling at my absolute best today, feeling slightly under the weather. But thank you nonetheless to Aditya and Brent for an incredible conversation and wonderful insights. Had a really nice time, and thanks for your dedication and patience from the viewers as well.
Absolutely.